Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our first Digital Leadership Series event of the 2021-2022 academic year. Can't believe I'm actually saying those words. The next year, the new year is finally here. My name is Vijay Gurbaxani. I'm the director of the Center for Digital Transformation, and just delighted that you could all be here joining us. At first, I'd like to acknowledge the sponsors who make this event possible so that we can offer to you at no cost, and that's the Beal Family Foundation and KPMG. As you all know, the tagline for our school is leadership for a digitally driven world. And you know, when we first launched the center in 2012, our focus was really on waking companies up to the urgency of adapting to the digital world. Where we are today is in quite a different position. Technology has shown that there is tremendous opportunity. The times have shown that there's tremendous opportunities from technology. Think about what technology has allowed us to do during the pandemic, you know, from Netflix and Amazon Prime to working from home to online education. Think about how difficult it would have been to go through the pandemic without what technology makes possible. But as the role of tech, as sort of the pandemic took hold, some of the challenges that we faced became much clearer as well. Kids without access to technology couldn't go to school. Workers who were not in knowledge work couldn't work from home. And sort of the risks were unevenly distributed across the economy. We were all aware of sort of the challenges with inclusion and equality in the tech workplace. So the benefits are flowing to a few rather than to all. And I think it's very important that all of us have the opportunity as a society to engage in the largest sector of the economy with some of the best paying jobs. And as all of us know, technology has, the tech culture has not necessarily been the best culture for inclusiveness. So I'm delighted to sort of talk about a broader perspective on what leadership in a digitally driven world should mean. And I'm joined by two, actually I should say I'm really thrilled to sort of host two of the members of the Merage family. So usually we host experts. This time I couldn't be more delighted to share that both the experts are actually integral members of the Merage family. So the first is Dean Ian Williamson. Welcome, Dean Williamson. So for those, I still call him the new dean, even though he started in January. And some of that is because, you know, he was stuck in New Zealand for a few months before he could actually get over here due to all the travel restrictions, but now he's here with his family. And the dean is an expert in organizational behavior, and in particular, he has a PhD in organizational behavior, and in particular on sort of talent pipeline management. And he's consulted with 20, I believe it's over 20 companies across six continents. So a lot of expertise in sort of thinking about talent. In our world, we use the phrase war for talent. And you know, there's a tremendous shortage of tech employees and tech workforce. So that's an important sort of set of issues to be addressing. So welcome, Ian. I'll turn the floor over to you in a minute. And our next guest is Rashmi Kumar. She is the SVP and Chief Information Officer at Hewlett Packard Enterprise. And most importantly, I shouldn't say most importantly, I will say most importantly, you might not, is an alumna from the Paul Merage School of the Executive MBA class of 2006, if I have that correctly. And to my mind, exemplifies what we are trying to create here when we use the expression digital leaders. So it's not just about success at your job, which of course is an important component of it. It is also about sort of being a responsible leader in more ways than just to the profits of your company. And Rashmi is known throughout the industry for her focus on fairness, for her focus on diversity, equity, and inclusive initiatives. She's active in T200 and is on you know, I won't go into the details, but a number of task forces and so on at HP Enterprise. Welcome, Rashmi. I'm so delighted that I could actually introduce Ian and Rashmi to the Merage Center for Digital Transformation community as two people we're really proud of to be associated with. So thank you and welcome. Let me turn the floor. Let me start with a question to Ian, and then let's just have a free-flowing conversation. A couple of comments to the audience before we get started. We're not taking questions through the chat. We are taking questions through the Q&A feature. So please type in your questions. We're going to have a conversation with the three of us for about 35 minutes, and then we'll turn the floor over to you. But please feel free to type in questions whenever you feel ready after you've heard something that you would like to push further on, or you have questions of your own. So Ian, let's start off with the question to you. So ever since you sort of took the job as dean, you and I have been having conversations about what leadership for a digitally driven world should really mean. And you know, we've expanded, you've urged me to expand sort of what the center focuses on from sort of, you know, where companies were really struggling a few years ago and still are to some degree around sort of actually even adapting to the digital world. But now the questions that we're addressing are so much more fundamental, you know, about creating opportunities for all, both in terms of employment, but also in terms of simple things like credit, you know, being able to get credit or being able to get an education and so on. So with that, what is your view today of leadership for a digitally driven world? What is the sort of the sphere of things you think it should encompass?
I think I should start off with just simply saying, as a business school, our job is to prepare leaders for what we think will be the biggest challenges they will face in their career. And for much of, you know, how we think about education, a lot of it has really been around the technical components. Pick your discipline: strategy, finance, accounting, whatever. But the work that I've done, and sort of just observing companies in different communities around the world, what I began to appreciate was actually oftentimes the biggest constraint companies face in terms of their ability to be successful, and it's companies, but it could be equally true for governments or other types of organizations, is actually not the competitive actions by other companies. It's actually not sort of technological shifts. Not to say those aren't very meaningful, but if you actually look at the big picture, the biggest constraints that most companies face are actually rooted in social issues. And so it's the access to education in a community which determines the level or quality or sophistication of a product you can sell. Right? And the less educated they are, the less sophisticated the product, and typically less sophisticated products have lower margins, right? It's the access to healthcare that determines whether or not people are healthy enough to actually participate in an economic activity. You can't even think about a service economy if your people are sick, unless the service just happens to be health. And then, you know, there's even participation or discrimination issues in the community. And so time after time, what I've seen is that these are the issues that destabilize the environments. They diminish trust, which then leads to a reduction in investment, which then shrinks the size of the economic activity you see in the community. So with that in mind, when I think about leadership for the digital-driven world, you know, I'm guided by two principles here. That one, the Merage School should be a world-leading institution in developing individuals who can understand business or commercial capabilities. Entrepreneurship, oftentimes, is technology is about creating something new, maybe even an entity, and technology, so they can enhance economic and social well-being. Like, that has to be part of the story. And if you think about a lot of the scrutiny or challenges that many of the major technology companies have faced, it's not because the technology they were utilizing was not successful. It was because the way it was being utilized was destabilizing the community or exacerbating problems. And then the second aspect that I'm guided by is that as a school, we should be thinking about our activities through our educational experiences and others as enhancing the representation of all the communities that can participate in this business and entrepreneurial activity. Because that then expands the opportunities that people have, which drives sustainability, both economically and socially. And, you know, I think it's particularly true for a school like ours, when we have such a big emphasis around technology, because technology can be the mechanism that alleviates many of the social constraints that we face. But clearly, it can also exacerbate or enhance these, or even create new ones.
Yes.
So we want to train leaders that understand this duality, that is about utilizing technology through commercial activity, but in doing that, appreciating the intended and unintended consequences this has more broadly on a social fabric. And how can leaders navigate organizations successfully for sustainable businesses that address both those goals? So that's the guiding principle for me as I interpret, you know, what we put out as our tagline.
No, and I think that's really important because we certainly want to be in the business of creating responsible leaders in the broadest sense of the word. So delighted to have sort of that expanded focus sort of in our curriculum, because it takes certain scale of technology to get to the point where the issues that it raises are so consequential. I remember 10 and 15 years ago, you could get by without, maybe that's a little too short, maybe 20, 25 years ago, you could get by without thinking through hard about some of the consequences of technology, but that is certainly no longer true. Rashmi, let me turn the floor over to you. So obviously you have sort of attained a very, very senior position at a tech company. Talk to us a little bit, and I know, like I said in my introduction of you, so Rashmi brings a wealth of experience. She's worked for everybody from utility companies to healthcare distribution companies. So you've got a ton of experience, but you're the sort of leader that we're trying to create, and because you have sort of this perspective on responsible leadership around DEI, but sort of also ESG issues. Talk to us a little bit. First, let's talk a little bit about your main, I shouldn't say your main job, your focus in terms of your CIO role, and what are your initiatives that you have to think about, and also sort of your commitment to some of the broader societal issues.
Yeah, definitely. First of all, thank you for everybody who are attending, and thank you, Vijay and Dean Ian, for inviting me to this. I do think, Vijay, as you said, going through that executive MBA program was a life-changing experience. I think it changed me as a person as well as a professional. And I still attribute a lot of my success or how far I've reached to the experience that I have gained at the university. There are so many examples I can use, which a lot of students here will identify that impacted who I am today. At HPE, it's been really a challenging journey so far. If all of you remember, HP originally, Bill and Dave, Hewlett and Packard were the founding members of the Silicon Valley, so to say. We were the first company to start in the garage. And from there, in the last 10 years, the company has gone through a lot of transformation from, as you know, HPE and HPI split, to HPE having a couple more spin mergers, but at the same time, our current CEO, Antonio Neri, realizing that we cannot be successful in this new form unless we transform digitally, both at the core as well as with our product and services to customer-facing organization, customer-facing products. So a lot of you who are here, you think, okay, you're a tech company, you started Silicon Valley, why do you need to focus on digital transformation? If you think about us selling products, we are still selling boxes, servers, and compute, and storage, and network. We want to transition to selling it as a service, which is a big change if you look at how we do business. At the same time, our core capability from order management, customer interaction to supply chain was very antiquated. It was technology enabled, but it was built for a $120 billion company and not a $30 billion company that we are today, as well as there was very little investment in enhancing it over the last couple of decades. So currently my role is dual focus. One is to pivot the company from a physical product company of selling technology to a digital product company where we are selling it as consumption, because all of you hear about the public cloud, the Amazons and the Googles of the world. There is enormous amount of demand, what we call is at the edge, because every business process is digitalizing. A patient in a hospital is generating data. A connected car on the street is generating data. An oil rig somewhere offshore is generating data. And there's no time for the cloud round trips to make intelligent decision as you talk about digitalizing and harnessing data to drive artificial intelligence to quick decision making. So we play in that sweet spot to say, I'll give you solution at the edge from technology perspective, and you will be able to make decision faster as if you are in a cloud, which we call a cloud at the edge. But if you look at implications to me as a CIO, it's huge. Our entire what we call quote to cash process is now transformed because I'm selling consumption. I'm selling a service. My contact with the customer is now every second versus every 3 years when I went for refreshing the hardware. And all that demands a very different level of understanding digital capabilities within the company to enable those. And that's why I say that a CIO now has to behave like a COO, where you have to understand every part and pieces of your business and connect the dots across. Because if you look at individual business units, either it's partner experience, customer experience, supply chain, or finance, they're optimized to be good in their silos. That's how they run their P&L. That's how the companies do better. But organizations like ours are now connecting the dots across, giving customer a cohesive experience end-to-end in the organization. And just to tee up the next point that we are here for, our CEO, Antonio Neri, wants to do it in a way which is environmentally accountable, socially acceptable, and provides the right governance as a public company to our stakeholders and shareholders. So that ESG becomes in the center of the objective for us when we drive these transformation across a 85-year-old company going forward.
Rashmi, that's very informative. And I have a couple of things to reflect on. One is you talked about computing as a service, or your business moving to as a service, which is the case of, across the board for, I can't tell you how, this as well as I do, how many companies, even when you talk to people at companies like Lyft, they're talking about transportation as a service. The assets are not owned by the customers anymore. And the mindset to delivering every second is fundamentally different. But the second point you touched on, which I think sort of, as you said, tees up very nicely, is this focus on ESG. So for a long time, we've talked about things like ESG, and I've been in this business for a long time. I refuse to say how long. But it's, for the first time, I actually feel that it's real. I was talking to an investment bank earlier, late last week, come to think of it. And one of the things, they were asked to evaluate a lot of target companies. And one of the things they said is every pension fund, every money manager is now saying, what is the ESG profile? What is the DEI profile of that company? So, there are real costs associated for the first time, I would argue, with not being socially responsible in the broadest sense of the term. So I think it's, and every person I speak to sort of senses that there is something in the air now that makes it much more real. And maybe the pandemic has heightened everything, and certainly the wildfires in California and flooding everywhere else, and everywhere else is an exaggeration, but floods in the Southeast, and so on. So I think these issues are really front and center, and I'm just delighted that our business school sort of is sort of saying we want to create not just the next generation of leaders, but the next generation of responsible leaders. So with that, Ian, let's just dig a little deeper, drill down into sort of why are DEI initiatives so vital, particularly in tech?
Yeah, I think I'll just build on the point you're just making. At the end of the day, every manager or leader in an organization ultimately has a responsibility for managing risk and identifying opportunity. That is, so the things that you were just describing around ESG, why they're being actually calculated into valuation prices or investment decisions, because what you're seeing now is we're getting more sophisticated in understanding what actually are the risks associated with ESG related concerns, and also where are the opportunities associated with that. And then because you put that now as a metric or an understanding, you begin to think as a leader, how do I optimize on it? What are the risks? What are the opportunities? And the diversity of your workforce and the inclusion or treatment of the workforce pop up immediately, because they show up at least in 3 areas. One, the opportunities are in your ability to identify unresolved problems in society. So you want to make a lot of money, solve the biggest problems in the community, right? People will cherish you, they will come after you. That is where you get the biggest impact. And so these market failures oftentimes are closely aligned with demographic issues. Mm-hmm. So you have underserved communities, and we can think about the underbanked, food deserts, or access to capital. And so when you see innovations that begin to address these major market failures, digital payment, for example, is a good example of where you seen industries that were just extraordinarily successful, oftentimes in lower income or developing communities. They identified a major market failure. And so the invention of the technology steps in it. And this is where the diversity of your workforce is important, because they know the story. They know the experiences. They can think of more broadly about the opportunities that a particular technology can be used. The second big area is actually in the innovation process. All right, so this is tried and true. It's been shown over and over and over again in many studies across a wide variety of settings, where the diversity of the individuals who are thinking about the problem, so you've identified the market failure, now you have to come up with an innovation around it. The diversity of that group tend to be much more successful in the invention phase, coming up with a solution. But equally important, they're far more successful in the harnessing phase, right? Which is actually executing on that invention in some way in a sustainable manner. And it's because they bring different resources to bear, right? So not just the ability to think creatively, which is more the invention component, but the ability to navigate the environment by which you're implementing this idea, right? And being able to gather data from your customers and understand their experiences. So that's the second key component. They drive the innovation. And finally, perhaps the most tangible and tactical aspect of all of this is the talent pool. And globally, what you see is huge shifts, demographic shifts. Orange County is a perfect example. So at the same time, we're getting much older quite rapidly. And we're also shifting in terms of the younger parts of the community are parts that historically have not been as represented in the tech industry. So I'm specifically thinking about the Latinx community. And so you have this dynamic of saying, well, let's fast forward 10 years. Who is the workforce? Well, the workforce are the people that are graduating from high school right now. And those individuals, by and large, there's a lower number of actual high school graduates, and there's a larger representation of Latinx individuals. And so, I wrote an article several years ago when we talked about this notion of the war for talent. And my punchline in that article was the war for talent is over. Talent won. They won a long time ago. And so if you're a company, especially a technology company, if you're not able to think about this as a driver of your success and diversify your workforce to incorporate all the segments of the society, you're not going to pick up the problems. You're going to miss the market failures. You're not going to be as innovative. And when it comes time to execute, you're going to run out of resources to actually be able to execute because you don't have the talent.
I think those are all right on the money, right? And especially in the war for talent, I haven't heard that said before. The talent already won, and we're seeing this across the board from the lowest wage workers all the way. We were in a CIO roundtable meeting last week, and the CIOs were saying our employees are now for the first time saying we're not moving back to the head office. We're leaving if you don't allow us to work remotely. And not everybody has that kind of market power, but certainly if you've got enough talent, you do have that market power. And I think your comments about sort of what the population mix is that is now going to be available to these companies, we really have to focus on sort of, it's clearly in our self-interest to sort of be able to find the talent wherever it is. But I will sort of expand on something that you said. You talked about the tech sector. So the truth now is everybody's in the tech sector, the Googles and the Facebooks of this world, well, they have a different war for talent, but the rank and file companies or everywhere else are in the same war for talent, and they've already said, okay, we can't get the talent that those companies can get, but they have their own sort of second tier, for lack of a better word, war for talent. And I think there's a tremendous demand. I've been seeing sort of some of the statistics for what our analytics graduates or even undergraduates with degrees in computer science. I mean, they're making six-figure salaries as their first jobs out of college. That was not the case when I graduated from college, right? So with that, Rashmi, you're in the position to hire the people we generate, but sort of give us some broader context around how HPE thinks about this. And by the way, I have to say, when I was graduating from grad school, HP was the most sought after job. I was in the PhD program, but most MBAs sought after, that was the most sought after job there was, because it was the first true tech innovation, basically started Silicon Valley. So kudos for that. But what are the initiatives you've got underway at HPE, sort of on your talent initiatives, broadly speaking, and then also focused on inclusion?
Yeah, that's some of the great insight that Dean Ian provided, as well as you added on. I'll just extend it by saying, if you look at all the programs that I'm running today, from our global transform the core, implement global S4 with 60 new applications to transform code to cash, move from physical data center to my private cloud data center, everything as a service pivot in our financial services organization, which is $6 billion business. We are going through its own transformation initiatives while insourcing teams, because IT had a huge wave of outsourcing and now we need experts in-house. Otherwise you're competing with other companies to find smart people in your supplier organization. So as I started on to hire almost 900 people in short time of 12 months, there are two things in my mind. One is I need to drive this transformation and I need diversity of thoughts as well. All the characteristics that Ian talked about and what UCI teaches, entrepreneurial mindset, taking risks, driving in from business outcome versus building technology for sake of technology. I really wanted to focus on bringing in diverse set of talent. I was hiring a lot in India, so it was very important for me to focus on female versus male ratio from that perspective, as well as in the US, having a campaign around attracting people at the same level that you mentioned decades ago when HPE was the coolest company to come work for because of the opportunity that we were providing, the amount of transformation and learning the team members will have that we had. So we kind of sapped every resource. We worked with employee resource group, female, African-American, young employee, Latinx, and campaigned in every forum to highlight. I'm happy to report at one time, I was able to hire 40% female inbound employees in our India office. Here, we went up to 37% at one point. We are down a couple of percentage digit, and HR was telling me it's because we tapped the market, and I'm like, nope, let's try harder, right? Working with HBCU University, working with, I'm on the board of Data Science Institute at University of Houston, getting our name and image out there, working with second-tier universities, right? Sacramento State, Chico State, attracting people, telling them our stories and opportunities that we provide. I also started managing the funnel very diligently. So any one of you who are building the team, focus on the slate, focus on the interview board, as well as see how it's trending from application to interview to acceptance to joining to onboarding, right? We have such a winning talent here, as Ian said, that we have people accepting but still shopping around and falling off at the day of joining. The war is so bad, right? Everybody wants the same set of candidates who are applying with me. So how do we stay engaged with them during the resignation process that they have? And when they come on board, what kind of onboarding experience we create? So I make sure that every month I welcome the new team members which are joining. I did invest a little bit in building employee engagement team because there was no point building the team without having the team which can make them feel comfortable. And all this is in virtual world. Our offices are open, but IT as an organization, 80% of us will work 80% of the time virtually. So that onboarding discipline, including bringing in company leaders to talk to people, and then my CIO staff having a separate part of onboarding, focusing on skip level meeting. And at the company level, we had enormous amount of support from our CEO. While we were going through the last year, the issues across the country with racial biases, we embarked upon a journey of listening session, and not only with our African-American community, but every community, and took their feedback, built a diversity, inclusion, and access group at board and CEO level, published our agenda, and started following through every piece of it as in every group. There are metrics, there are numbers that we track, but over and above what our people respond well to is the personal connection, even in the virtual world. You know, the authentic leadership that we talk about and our focus on people and how do we want to drive them towards it. While we talk about this, we do create carbon footprint because we sell compute and storage which consume energy. but I welcome everybody to go to our website and if you get a chance, read the Living Progress Report. It also talks about how we are reducing carbon footprint by innovating in the technology space. So we are in high performance compute for all different segments like public sector, private sector, globally, as well as we sell a lot of compute and storage. And how do we make sure that as we build it, it becomes more efficient in terms of power and cooling, as well as provide that data back to our customers around how many cars we are keeping off the streets if you buy this type of infrastructure. And recently I was judging an innovation quest, what won in our as a service offering, which is GreenLake, publishing environmental data real time to customers as they use the compute going forward. So these are kind of multifaceted initiatives that we see across the organization, across the company, which is trickling top down for everybody encouraged to contribute their part to make it happen across the board.
Thanks. Rashmi, could you just talk very quickly about some of the metrics you use to track sort of your progress on some of these initiatives?
Yeah, so I don't have the exact number memorized, but if you look at our HP EFS initiative, 3 billion of our business is what we call contributes to circular economy, where we pick up used servers, laptops, any technology product, irrespective of the brand that it comes from. It does not have to be HP brand. And we recycle it to sell it to folks who cannot afford the brand new equipment, right? So the not-for-profits and some of the government entities across the globe. It has a huge impact on environment from that perspective. Within our team, as I have mentioned, some of the metrics, we do track global women representation across the organization, percentage of women executives across the company. These are our MBOs. So we make or lose bonus if we miss those, as well as African American and Latino. And then the high performing hypo attrition rate as well. So which goes to engagement, right? Are we keeping them engaged when we have them onboarded? And it's, I've worked in many companies and I have been fortunate to work for Southern California Edison or Toyota or McKesson, which are all very committed to D&I. And now we are adding access to it for last 5 or 6 years since I have been tracking it. And having that metrics driven approach is not superficial. Some people think it's about the number, but if you can't measure it, you can't improve it, right? And that's why those numbers are very important to me.
So Ian, with your expertise in global human resources and all the worldwide experience you've had, sort of give us a broader perspective on some of these challenges and how do we create meaningful, sustainable change? You know, clearly HP is an innovative company committed to this, but broadly, what is the set of things we could do as a society?
I think the most innovative things that you're seeing companies do is appreciate they have a choice, right? So if we just think about the very basic element, I talked about the tangible aspect of just having access to talent. There's 2 choices. You can get into a bidding war or over the existing people that you have. And that's, you can win, but most times you're going to lose because there'll always be somebody that's a little more desperate than you. And so you just fight this rotating battle. Or you can actually think very strategically and be innovative around how do I expand the base? And what I see companies, the ones I think I look at and go, wow, that's the ones I would admire or really see as being sophisticated. They're beginning to understand that how do I deal with the systematic leaks that exist in the talent pipeline? And so if you think about a pipeline, you know, using that metaphor, you have the people that are coming in, the recruitment and selection activity, you have the people that are being developed, and then you have the people that are being utilized. And if you're a company and you're struggling, it's normally you're having problems in one of those 3 areas. But interestingly enough, if you're a community and you're struggling, it's also the same story, right? So nobody's moving there, right? So you don't get talent coming. The people that are there are underdeveloped. We oftentimes think about education as an indication of that. Or the people that are there that are skilled, they are underutilized, oftentimes because they're leaving. And so you can think about many communities around the world, they have repatriation activities, try to get the talented people to come back. And so the companies that get this are saying, well, what are the underlying reasons why we see the leaks. And in most cases, they're social issues. So I can give an example of a company I was working with in Malaysia, very large multinational firm, very successful, been in the company for several decades, began to appreciate that the investments that they needed to make that were going to pay the biggest dividends were actually not an extra dollar in R&D, despite the fact that that was critical, developing new offerings. It was actually dollars they were putting into how do we support the educational opportunities for our employees, but also the community that our employees come from. So we can sort of seed for the future talent. And that was a very interesting trade-off because it was a dollar that could have gone to something that was inside the firm, but they appreciate that the return on that was actually going to be a lot bigger because it stabilized their access to talent, but it also stabilized their pool of customers. Right. And so they're making choices around how do I address the leaks? And in addressing the leaks, it actually stabilizes my economic opportunities and expands the base. And, just fundamentally, whatever failings your community has right now is in this area, they are baked into whatever failings your company has. And if you think you can fix it in your company and not dealing with the community, well, you're just dealing with the symptom at that point in time.
I think one of the things that's become really sort of clearer in the last year and a half has been the interdependence or the interconnectedness of the world at so many different levels, local communities, all the way to sort of the globe. I want to switch gears a little bit to a slightly different aspect of sort of diversity that we haven't talked about, though Ian touched on it a little bit in terms of innovation. We're being ruled more and more by algorithms, like, suggested life partners, more trivially movies to watch, prison sentences, which is one of the things that sort of worries me a lot, because as we all know, there's a lot of biases built into these systems. And clearly sort of having, you just look at what's been happening at Google and sort of some of the issues that have come up with their, I'll be polite here, personnel policies and leave it at that. How do you see that, Rashmi, in terms of sort of making sure we build sort of fair AI systems in a very sort of heterogeneous world?
Yeah, it's a great point, and it's so wide and so deep, right? If you look industry after industry. I'm also on board of a small public company which is into cancer diagnostic, and how they develop their tests, how they create access to folks, how they capture the cross section of people to be able to afford or ask for even that test, right? It's very, very critical. Within HPE, I would say I'm part of a ethics, AI ethics governance committee, which work with a working team, even to enforce how the equipment that we sell gets used, right? Is it being used for the right purpose to make it better for the mankind to use AI, or it's being used not for that right purpose, as well as working with a set of nonprofit to build models around understanding impact on human trafficking, or providing these types of solutions and our intelligence to be able to drive better outcome, which impacts our environmental and social goals. We are big with National Environmental Research Group. They use our high performance compute to run their AI models and whatnot. We do a lot of forward and backward integration in building the machines which can run these algorithms better and faster, but do that while focusing on, is it being used for the right purpose to improve the social footprint of the country as globally, as well as the outcomes that we achieve, which makes it equitable for all of the demographics to leverage the solutions that come out of it.
Great. So to the audience, I have one final question for Dean Williamson. And in the meantime, we're getting a lot of questions, but feel free to add your questions to the Q&A. But Ian, the final question to you: how can we at Merage develop, we've touched on so many issues and rather rapid approach, but there's a lot of things we have to do to build this to develop the next generation of leaders. How do we best do that?
I think we should be guided. I'm guided, and certainly I think that helps provide some direction by three things. One, we want our students to be aware, right? So how are we in our curriculum ensuring that our students are aware of the broader context of not just the technology shift or the commercial opportunity, but the broader implications this has for specific communities. And are they aware of the demographics? Are they aware of the implications? Do they have these numbers at their fingers, similar to how we would have other numbers at their fingers? If we've done that, then that's important. And that's both through the way we teach, but that's also through the types of questions we answer in our research, right? Yep. Because the research provides the platform to shape individuals' expectations as to what is or is not important. The second thing is we need to provide them with the appropriate motivation, that it's not just that I'm aware of this, I understand I'm motivated to act on this because I see the opportunities it creates for me either in my company or by having certain skill sets that actually create opportunities for me individually in my career. So the individual that understands, the executive that can sit down at a table and talk about the commercial realities of the technology, but also think about how this will be received by the community, the social implications, the regulatory frameworks that may or may not exist, and how to convey these risks and opportunities to an investor, that's the one that's going to be successful as an individual and also as a person. So then we have to understand that they understand the motivation for putting their best effort in this space. And finally, they have to be capable, right? So are we giving them the opportunities to practice this through our consulting activities that we embed in part of our programs? Are the curriculums we're putting in things like our Master's of Business Analytics, providing them experiences to test this, to trial this? And so they have that confidence and I have the capability. So it's awareness, motivation, capability. As an educational institution, as a business school in particular, when we train leaders to have that around these issues, they're fine.
Yeah, and I think you covered it extremely well. So we have work cut out for us, but I do think I'm just so delighted and glad that I'm a part of an institution that is so committed to building sort of a better future for all of us. With that, let's turn over to, so we've got a lot of questions, like I said. So the first question is from Chris Pounds. He works at Edwards Life Sciences and is director of ERG. He said, in June, LinkedIn announced that it would be paying their affinity group leaders a $10,000 supplement because of the extra work they're taking on. I assume these are sort of, you guys are nodding your head. So often these leaders are members of underrepresented groups. How do you see these bonuses as offering incentive for the rest of us? I'm changing his words a little bit, for all of us to take up this kind of work. So it shouldn't just be, according to Chris, just that community leading its own affinity group or whatever the case might be. It's like, how do we get this to be broader?
Well, I think.
Go ahead, Ian.
I'm sorry. I think there's an interesting thing, right? So there's participation in activities and there's leadership in activities. And so, it's not, if we said, I would like to have a group that would come up with some new innovations around a particular service, people might participate in that group and we might want to incentivize for whatever criteria for a leader to do so. So I kind of view this as the same thing. We feel comfortable with that because we see the service or product offering is driving some commercial value for the firm and we appreciate incentives. I don't actually see a difference in this situation. I actually think that we would want to frame these activities as things that make us better as an organization. Some people will participate, and participation brings a certain level of obligation and commitment. And then some people will lead. And we typically know that brings a much higher level of obligation and commitment. And so, but maybe the other point here is ability to understand this is not 100% linked to your ethnicity or your gender. Yep. Right. And so you have plenty of examples of individuals who put up their hand to lead projects or products or service activities that don't have necessarily a technical degree in that space, but have an insight. The same would be true here. And so I think, this is encouraging individuals to, one, take on that task, see the opportunity, and challenge yourself to rise to the occasion. And if we need to incentivize and provide a recognition for great leadership, I think we do that in every other situation in organizations.
I'll add 2 points to it. First, I'll add is when I stop using paper towels at home or paper napkins at home or disposable plates at home and decide to wash my dishes, it's a very personal decision, right? Paying $10,000 will not make somebody play a role in an ERG. It needs to come from inside for the people who do it. The other piece I'll add to it, that there is a concept that is very popular here, and I'm happy because we call it allyship, right? When we talk about ERG or women ERG, when we talk about maternity and paternity leave, you will see maternity leave gets used because it changes women physically and they need to bear the child and feed them when they're born. But when my male employee comes and tells me that I need my paternity leave or baby bonding leave, I say you have arrived as an individual and a person, right? To encourage that behavior. So the point I'm trying to make is, one is that participating in these activity is not only making the company better, but it makes this planet better and me better and the whole social network that I deal with better. At the same time, allyship is very important as well, right? I'm identified as Indian female, but I'll tell you, I have all ethnicity member talking to me. And when the incident happened last year, I didn't have my African-American team member coming talking to me, most of the white male team member coming talking to me. And we have built that environment where they were comfortable asking me, how can I participate and how can I contribute? And I did not have an answer. I was a sounding board. We talked it out of why it is important. And the answer lied in Dean Williamson's initial point, that if you bring in underserved society into the economy, your pie gets bigger, and everybody gets a bigger piece of it now. So it's good for everybody. That's the conclusion after having 3 or 4 conversations that we had. So when each one of you think about your ESG or ERG or DEI and access initiatives, first think about, are we personally responsible to it? 2 is, how can we be better ally for all ethnicity, for all gender, for all belief of people? And 3rd is that it makes economic sense and makes this society better for our next generation to survive in.
You said something important, Rashmi, which I think is resonated with me too, which is, I actually wonder if paying is, I don't know the answer, I'm not an expert in this field, but I actually wonder if paying sort of may actually hurt the cause because you make it more, I don't know the right word is, commercial, rather than sort of encouraging people from an innate place to participate in some of these. But here's a question from Erin Thomas. This is sort of a provocative question, but I'll throw it out there. Can companies actually lead in sort of addressing societal issues or community issues?
I think they have to. Read the CEO Donahue's interview that came out today. I still have to internalize it, but Nike was in a big time trouble at some point about the treatment of diverse employees, as well as the products that they were building, where they were building, and see the change the company has brought in a very short amount of time, right? This next generation, and I had once, yes, there is a role called generational consultant, listen to her, and she talked about our generation, which is 45 million people. Next generation is 87. And then the generation after that is another 47. So in workforce, almost 130 million people who are there today will not work for a company which is not responsible socially and environmentally. The war for talent, which Talent has run, great example there. If you want to attract and retain people, people are no more driven by how much money I make, what position I'm in, what's the Dow or S&P status of the company and the stock price. It's more about, do I identify with this company? Can I work and call myself that I work for this company going forward? I know still we have a long way to go, but examples around EA Games, Nike, Adidas, means there are a plethora of those which shows that they had to change and turn how they acted. Uber is a great example to be able to attract the talent and be existing today as a company in this earth.
No, you know, as I mentioned, I've been here teaching for a long time, and I will say that I have seen a real shift in sort of the features that, you know, our students are looking for in the companies that they want to work for. And if they can't embrace the values of the company, they are often reluctant to go work for those companies. And I think it is really sort of at its peak right now, and I hope at some level stays it. Here's another slightly difficult question. Thank you so much for this session. As a person of color, this is not directly related to what we're talking about, but it is broadly related. I have experienced micro and indeed macroaggressions in workplaces. What advice and tools might you suggest when management or leadership looks the other way, other than leaving the organization? So how do you adapt to a challenging workplace if you're a person of color?
Well, I'll take a stab at that. 2 points around that. The most important one is the management looking the other way, right? So as a leader in an organization, the responsibility is to create an environment that allows all your employees to thrive. And if you are either aware of something that is reducing that, or ignorant of something that is reducing that, either way, that's a form of incompetence in my mind, right? Mm-hmm. And so maybe the most dangerous part around that would be, it's not that all managers and leaders are able to be aware of all aspects, but do they create an environment where the people that they're responsible for are comfortable coming to them, making them aware of something that made them uncomfortable or distracted them from the environment, from doing a good job? And so in that comment, I would go, most likely what's going on here is the leader's unaware, so that's on the leader. But then even worse is the leader hasn't created a space where the person feels comfortable saying, hey, listen, this happened to me. This is how I took that. And this is kind of what I need to be more comfortable here. Can you help me with that? And the leader saying, actually, that's my job. It is my responsibility to do that. And, the microaggression issue ranges in a lot of different ways, the subtle slights, and there's a lot of research about that. And what I would say is the leader being much more in tune to sort of saying, how do I take perspective taking to understand that in certain situations, without, sometimes with negative intent, sometimes without, it's not going to impact all my workforce in the same way. And I have to kind of pick up on that, be responsible for taking on that for the other person, even if it's not my cause, and work with my team to correct it. So that to me is a leadership issue. And, if it was, I have a leader who doesn't understand our finances, and as a result, we always lose money. How do I manage that without leaving? We would typically say, you're going to leave.
Yeah.
Right. But the most valuable thing in most of these organizations is actually the people we're talking about. They're the ones that are making the money. So it's incompetence. Right. And so how do we, as leaders, take on the responsibility to understand whether I like it or not? That's my responsibility to manage that situation.
So here's a question from Anita. So this is sort of a more practical question. How do you balance the different needs of demographically diverse users when designing customer-centric services? So I'll toss that one at you, Rashmi, because I think that's what you do every day. How do you trade these things off?
Yeah, so if you think of how you're building your products and solution for digitally diverse or diverse community, we can have a whole session on this topic separately, right? But the way we have done it in this company is we focus a lot on customer and partner journeys and really understand what kind of customers and partners how they're interacting with our capabilities, right? Across with people as well as technology. I would say that there was a divide between B2C and B2B, I would say, until 10 years ago, right? Which has gone now, because even B2B customers are demanding the B2C type capabilities because they don't want to interact one way when they're interacting with a product for their personal use versus they're interacting with a product for their business use. And these are the business decision maker who will hit click to buy, right? So you need to really, we always think about what is the ultimate customer experience that we want to deliver to the customer, which is in line with B2C type experiences. Now comes the tough part of which we are still very mature on across the board, across all businesses, is around accessibility topics, right? And how do you make it easier for them to interact with digital product versus how they interacted with physical product. I've had a couple of conversations with our Apple counterparts, and they are doing huge amount of innovation. Microsoft is the same way, but still we have a long way to go. And when you think about internal employees and how they interact, I didn't talk about that part of my job where I had to take 80,000, 60,000 employees, 20,000 contractors overnight work from home once COVID hit last March 14th, I still remember that day, is also thinking about demographically diverse workforce, right? Even if somebody took maternity leave and back to work, in IT, we work 24/7, 365. As a company, we have done a lot for our employees where we have given Wellness Friday off, but IT team members cannot get it because we are 24/7, then working individually with the managers and understanding what are the needs and wants of those employees and how we should be accommodating to accommodate their personal worlds. So as I said, I can bring in a ton of examples here, both from customers as well as treating my employees as customers around different demographic, gender, global location. We are a global company, right? So localization is huge for us, and not only from language and legal and tax perspective, but people and behavior perspective as well. And we as a company needs to think about it in a very thorough way.
I think that brings us to the end of the evening. We have, boy, have we covered a range of sort of topics within a broader theme, but what's fascinating is there's so many sort of sub-issues, for lack of a better word, within sort of this umbrella term that we, of DEI, but it affects sort of how we bring workers and, valuable, sort of build up a valuable workforce, but also how we contribute to the community in very fundamental ways. And I think the role of the university and business schools in particular has never been clearer about sort of what our obligation is to society. So I feel privileged to be a part of, with great leaders like Ian and Rashmi, to be a part of this journey for many of us. One of the thrills of being in education is you get older by 1 year every year, but your students stay roughly the same age. And it's always fun to sort of learn from them and see what motivates them. And it's sort of really a privilege in so many ways to be able to contribute to their journeys. So I want to thank Ian and I want to thank Rashmi for their really deep insights into a very complex and sensitive set of topics. I want to sort of close with a thanks to our sponsors again, who make this series possible at no cost, KPMG and the Beal Family Foundation. I do want to announce our next event, which will be on October 7th. We're featuring Eric Brynjolfsson, who's a professor at Stanford, and probably the foremost expert on productivities from digital technology. The title of his session is The AI Awakening, What It Means for Productivity and Business Performance. So hopefully you can join us at that event. Thank you so much for your attention. Thank you for your support since the day we launched this center 10 years ago. Just delighted that so many of you have stayed with us on our journey, and welcome to our new friends and who have joined us here for the first time today. So we look forward to seeing you at future events. And once again, thank you, Ian, and thank you, Rashmi. Really appreciate the time and your insights.